Hey everyone. So I want to talk about Taylor Swift a little bit. I do want to preface this by saying that, first of all, I don't know her work well enough to consider myself a fan. I'm certainly not well steeped enough in it to call myself a Swiftie. Um, but I've listened to a great deal of her music. I've enjoyed a lot of it. I think she's a tremendously gifted songwriter and performer. Uh, Obviously, all evidence. I've never been to one of her shows, but there's just no denying she probably puts on a hell of a show. She's an incredible performer. I just think she's an amazing talent. She's been very prolific. She's been doing this for quite a while now. She's got staying power. So none of this is intended as a major kind of a hater type thing. I do not dislike her in general in any way. I was not impressed much with the current album, the Life of a Showgirl. I didn't like it. I thought the mood on it was generally very chip on the shoulder, kind of a "Hey, I'm happy, f you haters" kind of. That's kind of the vibe I got off it. And also, I didn't really find a whole lot of the usual energy, the usual inventiveness in the lyrics. The poetry didn't seem to work this time all that well. It really felt forced to me. It felt like the kind of thing a student turns in when the teacher says, "Write me a three stanza poem and include two literary allusions." Um, I should also note that I'm not a big fan of Travis Kelsey either. That's primarily a football thing. Like, I'm in Buffalo. We're conditioned right now to not like the Chiefs very much. Um, he's not really the type of player I like very much. I don't like a lot of his antics on the field, and I tend to react strongly when there's just this collective societal decision that you all like this certain thing now. So I'm not a big fan of his, but that's not a super strong opinion, nor is it one that I can justify very well. So make of that what you will. But I have noticed some things since she announced her engagement that are they're not red flaggy. I'm going to say that. It's not that strong, but thinking maybe yellow alert. If you're up on your Star Trek lingo, yellow alert is when, the captain's like, "Hey, there's something going on. We're not sure what it is, but everybody just kind of get ready because, we're not sure what's happening." When she announced her engagement, she posted some of their engagement photos on Instagram, and they're lovely photos. No issue with those. But I was struck by the caption. She posted it as, "Your English teacher is marrying your gym teacher." Maybe it's the other way around. I'm not sure. So obviously she sees herself as an English teacher, and Travis Kelsey is the gym teacher. Now, I'm probably reading way too much into this, but that metaphor strikes me as a little problematic. First of all, I'm not sure why she sees herself as an English teacher and not as a music teacher or even a drama teacher. That struck me as interesting. If she prioritizes the lyrics in her songwriting more than the music itself, the performance, um, that's just something that struck me and that stood out. Also, expecting that kind of positive reaction to your English teacher is marrying your gym teacher seems to assume to me a kind of a type of high school experience that generally I have not found to be universal. It assumes a kind of positivity of the high school experience that I don't know that we can assume across the board. Also, my personal experience, I can't speak for anybody else, but when I was in high school, also in junior high, because when I was in a small school, rural New York, grades 7 through 12 were all in one building, there were several teacher romances that ended in marriages while I was in that building. And every one of them failed while I was still in that building. So, just from my personal high school experience, your English teacher marrying your gym teacher doesn't really ring a positive tone. And then there's just the fact that by phrasing it this way, she seems to be saying that she literally sees herself as a teacher. And in my experience, with an artist in any medium starts to see themselves relating to their fans, their patrons, whoever, as a teacher rather than an artist, um, things can start to go awry. One example that leaps to mind for me is a writer that I used to, when I was younger. I won't say worship, but I was a big fan of this writer. His name is Richard Bach. He was a writer during the 1970s, and he wrote, yeah, he came of age or he started actually in the 1960s. He really hit it big in the 70s. Before he was a writer, he was a pilot, and flight is a metaphor that constantly turns up in his writing. And he wrote a number of books, in the 60s, maybe even in the early 70s, pertaining to flight, his experiences as a pilot. Various sorts of planes. One was about flying a biplane across the country. I want to say 1972, he hit it huge with a book called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which is a very short book. You can read it in about an hour, quite frankly, if you're motivated. But it's kind of a fable about a seagull who discovers that he loves the act of flying, and he gets drummed out of the seagull flock, seagull herd, whatever their collective term is, because for them, flight is just utilitarian. You fly to get food. You fly to get from point A to point B. This guy was, and it's a fable about conformity, and there's a lot of kind of 1970s spiritualism in it. That book hit huge. It was just a big phenomenon back then. And Bach seems to have taken the lesson from that book that he was now a guru of sorts. His next book, a few years later, was called Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And this was full of various life lessons Richard Bach wanted to share with the world. I don't think Illusions is all that good a book, personally. I don't remember liking it very much, even when I was a huge Richard Bach fan. The book of his that really captured my attention was called The Bridge Across Forever, a love story. And this is a book where Bach discusses his search for his soulmate. By this point, his first marriage has failed, and he's living a very lonely life as a successful author, and he's looking for his soulmate, his permanent love. He finds her in the form of an actress named Leslie Parrish. She's actually a very real person. This is autobiographical. And it's a really wonderful book. It really is. Just terrifically written. Bach depicts himself not entirely positively, but he learns the lessons throughout, and he eventually, marries Leslie, and they go off to live their, wonderful life. A few years after that, in the late 80s, another book comes out called One, just the number 1, O-N-E, in which he and Leslie go off to have adventures in which they learn more lessons, and this is kind of more, the teaching type thing. I leaned on Bach heavily when I was early in my college years, but I eventually moved past him and kind of lost track of him. I eventually learned, I want to say in the late 90s, maybe the early 2000s, that Bach and Leslie's marriage actually failed. They actually ended up divorcing. Bach, who's still alive, he's very old now. I think might even be in his 90s, I'm not sure. But he's had 2 marriages since then. I'm pretty sure both of those have failed as well. And news of Richard and Leslie's marriage failing really hit the fans kind of hard. It didn't hit me all that hard. I wasn't that invested by the time I learned this, but The Bridge Across Forever really purports to teach lessons about love and how souls find their their eternal soulmates, and their and there's a lot of 70s and 80s kind of spirituality about this, past lives and astral projection, ESP, all that sort of thing. And to learn that it failed anyway, and were they not soulmates? Was there something else going on? A lot of the fans really reacted against it, especially when you learn that the teacher isn't really learning the lessons they've taught. And that's something I wonder about with Taylor Swift. Are the lessons she's teaching the ones that her fans need, the ones that her fans are going to be wanting to learn? I don't know that they are, and that's something that I think about a lot. Then there's the fact that students can grow beyond the teacher. I guess we'll have to see. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on the current Taylor Swift album.